Texting.
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 Texting. Texting. Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting.
Mark, Will, and Tomek present
Texting.
Hello, all you textual deviants, and welcome to another episode of Texting. I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
And I'm Tomek in Tartu.
Say what? You're not in Moscow?
I've escaped.
Okay.
Yeah, the crazy part is that I'm willingly going to go back. I've just been chatting with my Estonian friend Veiko for the last 48 hours and just hearing the perspective of Russia from Estonians, and it's not good. So
Well, tell us more about Estonia, we who know nothing about it.
well, it's usually grouped with the Baltic states, population of 1.8 million, belonged to the Soviet Union, and wasn't particularly happy to belong to the Soviet Union. Just after the coup in 1991, Estonia kind of took advantage of the instability in Russia and demanded its independence. And since then, it's experienced rapid economic growth. So now when you visit, I think it most resembles Scandinavian countries like Sweden, Norway. Very prosperous, very clean, high-tech paradise. Skype was invented here. So I'm in
Really?
this, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Skype is Estonian in its
Right.
origin.
Right.
Interesting.
I'm in the second city, Tartu, which is where the university is located. It's one of the oldest universities in Europe, founded by a Swedish king in the 17th century. I can't remember his name, but I did send you a picture.
Gustavus II. I think I wrote him a postcard in Postcards from the Nordics.
Oh, nice. Okay. So yeah, they've been very on edge since the war. Apparently, in terms of ratio or proportionally to their budget or their military budget, they've been the biggest contributor to Ukraine in terms of arms. Ukrainian flags are all over the city. And whereas you might say that supporting Ukraine can come off like virtue signaling when it's done by Americans or people without much of a personal connection, but kind of just following a media frenzy, for Estonians, it's very close to home. Veiko was telling me, just how he grew up in when Estonia was part of the Soviet Union, and just having to load a Kalashnikov and describing just how poor the country was, and the toilets in his secondary school, they called it something like Stalin's. I wish I could remember, but there was a nickname for the hole that they had to piss in. But yeah, I don't know. I could probably answer any kind of questions you have because I've learned so much in the last 48 hours. My friend Veiko is like a double PhD in physics and philosophy. There obviously is a strong national identity in Estonia, a strong sense of nationalism because of maybe this. I think that tends to happen in small countries, especially countries that are somewhat newly independent. But I would say like they were less free than countries like Poland and Hungary, which were under the Soviet sphere or influence, but they had some degree of autonomy. Whereas Estonia was firmly in the Soviet Union, and because of that, I think that the resentment is stronger here towards Russia.
Are they a NATO country?
They are in NATO, yeah, and they're grateful for it. I'm not someone who's considered myself a particularly pro-NATO or pro-West, but it's hard to argue with someone when their experience is so raw and and direct, right? I mean, it's this guy's whole lived experience. So,
Yeah. Well, what are you doing there?
well,
Is it top secret? I mean, can your masters in the Kremlin permit you to talk about it?
Well, very simply, so people trying to travel outside of Russia right now, they have limited options because of all the flight bans. So the most favored route for people who are flying now out of Russia to Europe is through Istanbul. But flights start at around $1,000 to England. A flight that generally would cost you between $200 and $400. So what I've done is I've taken the land routes, and I took a bus here to Tartu for about 30 euros, and then I'm flying tomorrow from Riga in Latvia to London, and that's going to cost me around $150. So total I'm saving.
Oh,
I'm traveling for like $250 rather than $1,000.
oh, that's great.
And
this is just a
meet my buddy.
this is a visa run.
This is a visa run to get a
basically?
new Russian visa, but obviously it's always nice for me to go back to quote unquote home in England. And
Well, your friend, how do you know him? I mean,
so I did my master's in Leeds, as you may remember, and Veiko was doing his PhD in physics at the time. So with the same university,
Leeds.
at Leeds, and we met through a friend of a friend, and became buddies. So we've stayed in touch. We haven't seen each other since Leeds, and that was about 10 years ago. So it's kind of nice that we stayed in touch.
Wow.
And now he's got a wife and 3 kids. So different manifestation of Veiko than the one I knew, but he's doing well, and he's working at the university here as a researcher.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, it would have been interesting to hear more about his perspective on things, but maybe we can invite him to appear on another episode.
Yeah. Yep. I think if we approached him the right way, he might consider it. I think he's a bit shy, and he actually said that shyness is one of the characteristics of the Estonian people. So maybe that explains it somewhat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get into our topic.
Great.
As we said at the end of episode 6, I was considering whether we should discuss David Bowie's Berlin trilogy or an essay on abortion by Carl Sagan and I believe his wife, Anne Druyan.
That's right.
But I opted for the latter because, as you know, in the States, there was a recent Supreme Court decision which relates to abortion. So let's be topical and go with the Sagan essay on abortion. Although by the time this comes out, it'll probably be a month since the Supreme Court decision came down, but that's okay. I'm sure it'll still be on many people's minds.
100%, and I guess the push for legislation will be happening now more than ever in terms of those states that are eager to ban it. So I think it's going to stay in the headlines for a while now.
Well, and both parties will use it to fundraise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to comment on that, or is that just a given? That's just
I guess
self-explanatory.
the only thing that I thought of when you said that was we learn a little bit about the history of abortion, particularly in the U.S., in this article. And we see that that's nothing new as far as the influence of money on abortion policy. So that actually the reason that abortion was initially outlawed, I believe it was at the end of the 19th century, was basically a ploy for the newly founded American Medical Association to monopolize the abortion market and profit.
Well,
from
there
it.
was that. Well, yes, there was that. There was that economic consideration, or a kind of proprietary consideration, that one particular professional organization had an interest in. But also, this was the time that America transitioned from an agrarian to an industrial economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a higher birth rate was needed to have a larger workforce. Am I right about that?
Yep, exactly right. And so, just as in many other aspects of policy, whether it's foreign policy, as we discussed in our episode on fascism, or other realms, things that we may initially think are ethical or moral issues, when it comes down to the decisions that are made, they are rarely motivated by morality, but are more motivated by money and practical considerations like a workforce. So yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss the ethics of it, and I'm sure we will today.
Well, I mean, this was a reversal of a tradition, or I guess a kind of precedent that was in place from colonial times. Basically, from colonial times to the 19th century, quoting here on page 6, the choice in the United States was the woman's until what's called quickening.
Do you want to explain that?
Well, as I understand it, it's basically when the mother, let's say, can we say that?
How dare you use such a traditional term?
The birth person, when can we say she feels, I guess, a kick?
Or some sense of motion, yeah. Some sense of motion.
Yeah, some kind of motion.
Could be a punch, I guess.
So, yeah, a punch or a kick. And so an abortion in the first or even second trimester was at worst a misdemeanor. In 1800, there was not, so far as is known, a single statute in the United States concerning abortion. And the authors, Sagan and his wife, I don't know Ms. Anne Druyan, so I'm emphasizing Sagan here. Sagan et uxor. Mm-hmm. But they mentioned that advertisements for drugs to induce an abortion were in virtually every newspaper and even in many church publications. I don't know where they found that. I don't know if that was in the Catholic priest study that they cite at the end, but that was an interesting detail for sure.
Yeah, I just pictured a Mark Twain or even a Melville character, one of those snake oil salesmen going door to door with his potions, and one of them is to get rid of babies. But of course, they'd have to use a more, the confidence man, exactly. But they'd have to use a euphemism, obviously. So maybe a pacifying agent or something like that.
Let's look at that change, though. Actually, I'm now that I'm thinking about it, am I understanding the economic necessity? By 1900, abortion had been banned at any time in pregnancy by every state in the Union. So this is, we see from the beginning there was basically no ban, mm-hmm. But then in 1800 there is a ban similar to what, the trend seems to be now. So it's like it's gone the pendulum has been swinging back and forth throughout American history. By 1900, abortion had been banned at any time in pregnancy by every state in the Union except when necessary to save the woman's life. What happened to bring about so striking a reversal? Religion had little to do with it. Drastic economic and social conversions were turning this country from an agrarian to an urban industrial society, as I mentioned before. But I think I misunderstood the reasoning there. America was in the process of changing from having one of the highest birth rates in the world to one of the lowest.
I don't think you misunderstood it. I mean,
okay, so they're trying to reverse the low birth rate.
Exactly.
Okay, but wouldn't they need? I always understood like the agrarian economy to be based on large families too, right? Like they needed a lot of kids to help out on the farm. So
right, and they had the kids at that point. And then as the economy transitioned to an urban industrial one, that's when birth rates dropped, presumably because
of more abortions. And
well,
then
I don't know about more abortions, or maybe just that people urban dwellers weren't as keen to have kids. Maybe that was a reflection of higher education levels or just pressure in the city. For whatever reason, anyway, it usually happens, right? That I think that people living in cities maybe have less kids. I don't know. That's my guess.
Unless they're Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what happened? It was the intervention of the AMA, the American Medical Association.
Right.
And so what did they do?
Well, they insisted that they were the only ones who could oversee the abortion process, and that up till then, different people, anyone could basically say that they were authorized to perform abortions, or they could say that they were a doctor without following the proper procedure. And now, only people who could perform doctors had to belong to the American Medical Association. And in this bottom sentence on page 6, new knowledge of embryology had shown the fetus to be human even before quickening. So that prevents abortions from taking place like in the second trimester. And as you read earlier, it can only take place if it's a danger to the woman. But Sagan is keen to point out that can be interpreted different ways, and usually was interpreted based on your economic standing, so that a rich woman could claim mental distress in a situation where a working class woman probably would only be able to make the same case if her life was at stake.
Yeah, and she was often forced to resort to the back alley or the coat hanger. And of course, at that time, the American Medical Association, its membership was primarily what gender?
Yeah, exactly. Women were effectively excluded from medical school.
Right. Women had almost nothing to say about terminating their own pregnancies. So it's just whatever the licensed male member of the AMA decides. Which, it's easy to see why that would be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's another shift in the 60s, and it's really a political movement, like it required a serious effort to change the policies again, and this time the AMA are actually on the side of the I guess mostly women who are arguing for reproductive freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like throughout American history have been these reactions to reactions occurring over and over again, and it never seems to be resolved. Although, as Sagan and Druyan point out, Roe v. Wade was actually the compromise position.
Sure.
Compromise is a key word here. There's a quote at the beginning of the article from John Dewey. When it comes to practical matters, circumstances compel us to compromise. And so I think they've chosen that quote because they consider Roe v. Wade to actually be the compromise position.
Right.
It's like there's nothing extreme about it. It represents the kind of mediation between these two extremes of always and never.
Right.
Right? Like and this kind of extremist dichotomy of pro-life and pro-choice, which they argue were chosen strategically. When you say you're pro-choice, you can say, well, I'm on the side of freedom, right? That's a traditional American value,
Right.
allegedly.
Something people cherish, absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas, the other side says, well, I'm on the side of life. Who can argue against that? What, are you on the side of death? So each side made these rhetorical decisions. I don't know how conscious they were, but...
And by the way, just speaking about those slogans, for me as a kid especially, I think the pro-life slogan is a more powerful one, which is not to say that I was ever pro-life in the abortion discussion, but I do think that the pro-life slogan, I think, is somehow more effective than pro-choice. I don't know.
Well, but of course, they're not really pro-life. Certainly if we're talking about odious characters like Pat Robertson, that's a clever descriptor he chose for his movement. Well, I don't know if he chose it, but they certainly would consider themselves to be pro-life, right? And they can adopt that term without explicitly saying that they're trying to impose some biblical interpretation on this matter,
Which, if we're to take Sagan as enough of a biblical expert to comment on this, he does point out that the Bible basically makes no reference to abortion at all. In fact, the most tangential reference is just one that... What page was that on? Do you have that handy?
Well, there's mention of the Old and New Testament.
Yeah,
and
it's
also
on page 5. Yeah, it says the only passage that's remotely relevant from Exodus decrees that if there's a fight and a woman bystander should accidentally be injured and made to miscarry, the assailant must pay a fine.
Not exactly a prohibition on abortion.
Right. So
I quickly Googled this and found that there's some other passages that mention things that might be interpreted as relating to abortion. Like there's mention of bitter waters or something. If you suspect that your wife or woman or one of your wives, let's say, might have been impregnated by another man, you give her this bitter water to drink, and if the baby doesn't die, then it's yours. But if it does die, then it proves that she was whoring around with some other man.
Oh, I thought they were
And-
giving
and-
like an early advice for getting rid of the kid with the bitter water.
Well, I mean, I think the idea was that if the fetus, the child dies, then that's proof that it wasn't yours.
So
It
it
was
was
illegitimate.
basically an attempt to abort the child, though.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
right.
so not exactly the kind of passage that supports the pro-life argument of Pat Robertson and his ilk.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say in that same passage on page 5, the Jewish Talmud teaches that the fetus is not a person and has no rights. So
Yeah, I thought that was
there's really
interesting.
not much. Yeah, there's really not much biblical support for this point of view, but how much knowledge of the actual Bible do fundamentalist American Christians really have anyway?
Yeah, I mean, they may have a fair bit of knowledge sometimes, but it still is the case, I think, that they tend to pick and choose which scripture they decide to emphasize or to live by, because I think that you'll find a lot of contradictions in the Bible. So-
Exactly. In that same paragraph, there's mention of hunter-gatherers. Among hunter-gatherers, there are usually no prohibitions against abortion.
Mhm.
I remember reading about this in Dr. Christopher Ryan's book on, I can't remember the title, something like the discontents of civilization. I've got it on my shelf behind me, but I don't want to step away from the mic and look it up. But Freud had his had his famous book on civilization and its discontents, and Christopher Ryan's title was, I think, alluding to that. But he talks about how that was just a fact of life for hunter-gatherers, and to this day, hunter-gatherers that are, still around in the modern world. There, not only is there no prohibition against abortion, but when children who are actually born are too weak to survive, it's just accepted as a fact of life. I mean, they know that to survive, they've got to control their populations.
Right. In a sense, there's like a very kind of Darwinian approach there, because they just have to be on the move, right? Because they can't really be held back. Is that do you think that's what's going on? To some extent?
Yeah, and there, there's something similar with the elderly, like when an elderly person is no longer able to keep up, I'm sure it varies from tribe to tribe, but there's usually some kind of ritual. They allow the elderly person to wander off by himself or herself, or
Into the forest.
they
exactly.
or they jump off a cliff, or they maybe they have some ritual whereby they bury them alive. I think I remember reading something about that in the what's the author of the book that Lord of the Flies, William Golding.
Okay.
The Inheritors. It's about the replacement of the Neanderthals by us, basically Homo sapiens, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a ritual. There was a ritual in which the elderly were buried alive. So
I feel like
it's
I've read
done
stuff
with,
like that in like Chinua Achebe's books as well, which like document.
Okay.
Africa, yeah.
yeah. Well, so it's ritualized. There's a kind of sacred quality about it, and it's the departure is handled with a certain amount of dignity.
Sure,
but
yeah. I don't want us to come off like we're being flippant about stuff like that, right?
No.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's accepted as a part of life. That's my
Right.
point.
Right, sure.
Now, he also says that it was common in ancient Greece and Rome. I'm sure that's the case. However, there is not exactly a prohibition, but in the Hippocratic Oath, okay, there's a line about not voluntarily assisting a woman with an abortion, not performing an abortion. That's like what the doctor taking the Hippocratic Oath would say.
So they're not meant to assist in an abortion.
Yeah, like it says something like, I don't remember the original Greek, but it's something like, I will not perform an abortion. And I think that in recent times that part of the oath has been excised, which is interesting. You know, like we still, doctors to this day, I don't know how that works. Like when they graduate from medical school, they raise their right hand and swear on a sacred book or something, and
Yeah.
how does that work? I don't know, but I think in modern versions of the Hippocratic Oath, that part has been edited out.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could inquire further about that.
But then we have the Church Fathers, the Catholic Church Fathers, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, saying that early term abortion is not homicide. And, abortion was homicide only after the fetus was already formed, roughly the end of the first trimester. This is according to the Council of Vienne in 1312. I'm on page 6.
Right, I'm with you.
And so, how many people know that? In the next paragraph, they point out that it wasn't until 1869 that abortion became grounds for excommunication.
Mm-hmm.
And this is only because after the invention of microscopes, they discovered that, it looks human, this fetus.
Well, and at one point, the argument was put forth that within individual sperm cells you could find the human form. Do you remember that section?
Well, this is in reference to the so-called homunculus, right? Which literally means little person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, an old idea of the homunculus was resuscitated. This is after they're looking at things under microscopes, in which within each sperm cell was a fully formed tiny human.
I love that
That's literally
idea.
what homunculus means. I do too. The homunculus is an interesting concept, but yeah, a tiny human, and notice that it's masculine, right? Within whose testes were innumerable other homunculi, etc., ad infinitum.
Wow, okay.
So
Yeah.
it's like inside the balls of one homunculus are, an infinitude of other homunculi, and each one of those has an infinitude of
Millions of cocks and
homunculi
balls. I think that'll...
in his balls.
I think
Yeah.
that's a nice segue to previewing next week's episode, which will be about...
Cocks and balls.
Yeah, Ginsberg's Howl. I'm pretty sure there are millions of balls in that poem.
Oh, is that next?
Yeah, that's next. I mean, obviously we're only in mid-flow
Okay.
right now, but just to wet the listeners.
All right, cocks and
Taste
balls
buds.
coming up.
Exactly.
You textual deviants. All right. Well, I've got some other phrases, key words and phrases that I want to throw at you. And
Can I
get
pull
your
back a little
reaction
bit
to.
as well? I mean, I want to give you free reign.
You're gonna pull out? Okay.
I have a funny story about pulling out. Actually, I was at like a women's group in Phoenix once when I was like 20 years old. Like liberal women who were just had a group. It was a cool group. Like I was friends with a couple of these ladies, and I think they were like just discussing stuff around reproductive issues, contraception, and stuff like that. And I remember just like asking like, "What do you guys think about the pull-out method?" Just like, I don't know. It was just I felt like silly asking, but I think that was like the main practice that I used. So hate to. Anyway, I don't
What
wanna
was their response?
They laughed, but they like accepted that it was like fairly effective. I don't remember, to be honest, like the exact like, and obviously you deal with different issues with that method. I mean, you can still like spread STDs that way, but I think as far as like pregnancy, it is like pretty effective. But I don't know. I feel a bit uncomfortable getting too much into that, so let's leave it there. But what I wanted us to talk about a little bit is just this idea of like compromise.
Coitus interruptus and what? Conversatio interrupta. Okay.
Thank you. No, just the idea of like compromise, right? Like I think that's like an interesting idea because so Sagan and Druyan say that are quite happy with the compromise that Roe v. Wade has settled on. And
All right, explain that. What is the compromise of Roe v.
Okay.
Wade?
So the
I
compromise.
like how I'm assigning you
No, that's fine.
all of these
That's fine.
explanations.
So first of all, maybe it's interesting to say that like Sagan thought that a possible good demarcation point between like where it's acceptable to abort would be prior to thought, because he thought that was what is distinctly human, or that's when someone could be considered human.
And why is that important? Why is that important? He makes, he says like this criterion of humanity is important because we obviously have no problem with killing animals, which we eat. I mean, some of us do, but
Right.
society at large doesn't. Right? Like there's no legislation for forbidding the slaughtering of cattle.
Except for some religious legislation, right?
Yeah. Well, he says there actually is no right to life anywhere in the world. Like that's codified.
Right.
And he mentions one exception being
The Jains.
The Jains of India. I mean,
Right.
but as you say, that's a religious group rather than a legal entity.
And obviously,
So it's
those things can bleed into one another in like Muslim
sure,
theocracies and so on.
sure.
But obviously, yeah, but that's
But-
just, yeah.
But yeah, I mean it has a religious impetus, let's say, and
Right.
I guess we have to admit that religion is an important part of this conversation.
Sure.
I mean, clearly,
Sure.
as well, we've already mentioned Pat Robertson and his hordes of pro-life warriors, but there is no right to life. We raise farm animals for slaughter. I'm quoting again, page 3. Destroy forests, pollute rivers and lakes until no fish can live there. Kill deer and elk for sport, leopards for their pelts, and whales for fertilizer. Entrap dolphins, gasping and writhing, in great tuna nets. Club seal pups to death, and render a species extinct every day. All these beasts and vegetables are as alive as we are. And then he also says, I don't remember if this is before or after, but, sperm is alive too. Eggs are alive too. So how far do we go in protecting this life? So he says what people really object to is the taking of a human life. So defining when a fetus becomes human, that's the issue.
Right. And so
but you could argue that point, right? Like, what if the fetus is just a little worm, Shouldn't, the Jains would maybe argue you shouldn't kill a worm either, right? Like, that I worked with a woman who was Jain, and not practicing in a traditional way, but just by birth she was a Jain, and she said like her grandmother in India didn't even wear shoes because the idea was that when you wear shoes you're gonna crush insects and so on. You probably would barefooted too, but there's this effort to try to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, there's the image with the Jains. I think there's some that kind of sweep in front of them as they walk,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So.
And like the ideal or the supreme act of the Jain is to just starve to death so that you harm nothing, right? There's this Indian or Hindu concept of ahimsa, non-harming, and that's like taking it to the ultimate extreme, right? Like if you we may be getting off topic here, but it's interesting. If you exist, if you live, that means you're killing something.
Yeah,
right? Even if it's a plant, even if you're vegetarian, vegan, whatever, you're still living on life. Life lives on life.
I think there was a quote you liked to throw in my face back in the day, and it was by it was by that guy who wrote the famous book about mythology.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell, and he said, what did he say? Something like everything is harm to someone, something like that, right? There's some quote like that.
Yeah, this came up in one of his interviews with Bill Moyers. It's like because Campbell was talking about like how we have to say yes to everything. We have to accept. We have to get to the point where we can accept everything, even the most horrific things, because that's what life is. And then Moyers asked him, but doesn't that lead to a kind of indifference in the face of evil? And then his response was, you yourself are participating in the evil, or you're not alive. Everything you do is evil for someone.
Right.
That's one of the ironies of the whole creation.
Yeah, that's really intense. I think we could do a podcast just on that stuff. So let's come back to the Roe v.
Let's go
Wade.
back. Let's go back to the womb.
So the origin of this again, you asked me about what Roe v. Wade, what the compromise was in Roe v.
Yes, what is it? Why is it a compromise?
So, and I just mentioned, maybe even what I said was already a sidetrack, but I just wanted to clarify that for Sagan, a logical place to consider something human would be when thinking begins. But actually what the Supreme Court decided in Roe v. Wade, they didn't use the criteria of thinking, they used the criteria of enablement, right? Is that the word, or is it?
Viability.
Viability, which basically means at what point the baby could be seized from the womb in whatever manner and survive without the mother. So,
Yeah.
And as far
But
as time
coincidentally, it was the same time, right?
goes, or close, I think, yeah.
Yeah, close. Yeah,
But
basically the end of the second trimester and the beginning of the third.
around the 24th week is when they consider a baby to have viability. But
The
that
ability
seems
to-
like very shaky ground because, as Sagan points out, like technology might change to where that idea of viability in that particular point might not be as easy to define.
like they could put a fetus in an incubator
Yeah,
or
for
something,
example,
and it
you
could
can get like a Brave New World image, all the farms with the fetuses.
And then you have the interesting situation of something becoming evil that wasn't evil before the technological innovation,
Yeah,
which is a perspective I hadn't really thought much about before. Like, is morality dependent on technological progress to some extent, or is it can it change?
it can change, of
due
course,
to
right?
that?
That's like a breathing constitution interpretation, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to adjust with the times.
Well, I'm thinking of drone warfare and how the technological change represented by that has altered perspectives, right? Like some of those we're really getting off track here, but it's interesting. But like some of those drone operators have PTSD too, like soldiers on the ground.
Right.
It's presented as, oh, this is clean warfare. They're just playing video games, but no, they realize they're like remote murdering people.
But it's scary if they don't get PTSD, right? That's even scarier.
Yeah, maybe so. But because of that technological innovation, we have to have a new conversation about the morality of warfare.
Sure.
Because the military-industrial complex, let's say, probably hoped that people would just accept the fact that, oh, okay, we're just doing surgical strikes, and so it's all fine, nothing to see here, just accept it.
Right.
All right, let's
So,
get back to the
sure.
womb,
So
as always.
The idea of like compromise. I just think it's important probably to remember that even though when we think about the issue of abortion, we do think of these two very clean arguments of the pro-choice and pro-life, which there, of course, a certain segment of the population does strongly identify with these clean absolutes. But actually, like a lot of people do exist in that space of compromise. So I just wanted to point out that compromise in the case of Roe v. Wade isn't necessarily a compromise between two separate opinions, right? It's actually just the position. It is the position of most people. You know what I'm saying? So in that sense, it's actually just like the truest response, the most not a compromise. It's not a compromise. It's actually just the best representation of what most of us feel like.
Oh,
right?
well,
That's what
for
I'm
sure,
saying.
for sure.
So
Yeah, for sure, it's the majority viewpoint.
yeah,
But
So it's- yeah.
but as he points out, the pro-life crowd is better organized politically. Like there's that little blurb at the end of the article talking about how this article was originally published in Parade magazine, which is kind of like
I remember
a
Parade.
Sunday. Yeah, it wasn't it like a Sunday
Yeah, it was like a
supplement
exactly.
to the. Yeah, so it's for a popular audience, and then they set up a 900 number that people could call and express their opinion. And it was equally divided among four categories. Abortion after the instant of conception is murder. A woman has the right to choose abortion anytime during pregnancy. Abortion should be permitted within the first 3 months of pregnancy, and abortion should be permitted within the first 6 months of pregnancy. So it was basically, 25% of the callers responded to each of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? It was split pretty evenly. But then Pat Robertson gets on TV and urges his TV followers to call again, and then the results are skewed, making it appear that the majority actually thinks abortion at any time is murder, but they were just better organized. And how many people didn't bother to call in?
Sure.
How many people said none of the above, or I don't care, or whatever? But definitely the Pat Robertson viewpoint is not the majority opinion. I can't believe. I mean, this article was published in 1990, but that old fuck is still alive, and we're still talking about him. I mean, I thought we got past this in the 80s, and we're still dealing with this.
I wanted to ask you, you said that the pro-life faction is better organized. Is that always the case? I mean, what data besides like this parade survey, which is kind of irrelevant anyway, what data?
Well, I mean, I don't have any data necessarily,
or
but
legislative accomplishments. Yeah, I mean,
look at what just happened.
Sure,
look at what just happened, right? Like the recent decision reversing Roe v. Wade. That's the result of 50 years of planning by these groups and these efforts to, what's the name of the organization that trains these judges? The Liberty Group or something, or I can't remember the name. But all of them, like Kavanaugh and the woman that was recently appointed, the handmaid that was recently appointed, they come out of this conservative organization, one of whose stated goals was to overturn Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, during their confirmation hearings, they say, oh, well, that's legal precedent. And then all those idiots say, that's good enough for me. I approve.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they, do what we always knew they were going to do, or should have known.
Right.
At least suspected.
So
anyway,
yeah.
Did we explain what the compromise position is? I agree with you, and another key term is slippery slope, right? Like each side thinks if they give an inch, they're going to succumb to the slippery slope. And so if you say that abortion is okay in the case of rape or incest, if you have that one allowance, then they'll just kill all babies indiscriminately. And then on the other side, the slippery slope is that if you allow the state to interfere or to intervene at any point, even like the day before delivery, then you'll never get that freedom back.
Yeah, I mean, I think
so. Each side is afraid of this slippery slope, and Roe v. Wade represents a compromise. So, what is the compromise? Like
the viability we talked about. We talked about viability.
I know, but what in practical terms, what does that mean? Because you've gotta have like a specific time, like even though it's arbitrary, like okay, you're 21, now you can drink alcohol, or you're 18,
Sure.
now you can go to the military, or you're 16, now you can drive a car. What is the specific time? And so he says, or they say, with prohibitions on abortion in the last trimester, except in cases of grave medical necessity, Roe v. Wade strikes a fair balance between the conflicting claims of freedom and life.
Mhm.
So that's it. I mean, it's Roe v. Wade permits the states, and again, it's the states that decide. It's not, it's not universal, but okay, you want to prohibit abortions in the last trimester. Sagan and Druyan agree that is a very pragmatic criterion. I mean, makes sense to me too.
I mean, I think we should admit that possibly more than any, I mean, every issue requires compromise and is more difficult when we look for the compromise. Like if we think about gun control or a multitude of issues, like the sexier position is always to take an extreme position. And the more difficult thing is to realize that actually like balance is necessary, even if it's not as clean. But I would say like abortion, more than maybe any other issue, it's hard to accept that there is like a middle ground, right? Because it's like, it is just so hard. I'm just saying, let's admit that it's hard to judge when it's acceptable and when it's something that just feels just unethical and immoral. That's all. I just wanted to.
Yeah, but given that difficulty, would you agree that Roe v. Wade was a pretty good compromise?
Yeah, I do. I'm just saying it's like abortion is it's a challenging issue, and I don't know. Have your views on abortion like changed over time, or what's your kind of personal instinctive feeling about like taking life or whatever?
I mean, there's the legal aspect of it, and then there's the practical aspect of it. Like these pro-life motherfuckers, if they find themselves in a difficult situation, they're gonna get their abortion too. They're gonna go to a blue state, or they'll go abroad or whatever. Like they're they're hypocrites.
A certain group will, but what about the people who just? There's a lot of people that are very genuine, whether you agree with them or not, are very genuine about the pro-life position.
Okay, well then that's their choice. But why do they have to legislate for everyone else? Just because it's right for them, that moral absolutism is disgusting. They're going to tell everyone else what they have to do.
Right.
And okay, if they're so pro-life, what do they have the same concern for, people that their government is bombing in their names? Do they have concern for these poor children? Once these fetuses become actual living, breathing human beings in the world, do they give a shit about them?
Okay,
I mean,
again,
until
I agree, but I still think that like that's somewhat of like a whataboutism. I mean, if we just talk about the issue of abortion, like I want to know, like, do you think there is something sacred that like about a 1-month-old fetus, for example? What do you think? And I'm not going to judge you either way. I'm just curious.
A 1-month-old fetus. Is it sacred?
Is it sacred? Is it something that...
Everything is sacred, My ejaculate is sacred, but I'm not gonna...
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
I'm not gonna save it. Well, maybe I would.
But my point is, like, when I've never gone
on page 4, I really love this phrase on page 4. A corps of high-minded semen preservers. You know, I mean it becomes ridiculous. Oh, everything is so sacred. I mean, it's not. They're not showing reverence for the sacred. They're being sanctimonious, I think.
But
them.
let's be generous now. Like, for example, you're a father. I'm not a father. I've never had this situation, and I don't even know. Like, I hope that I assume everything in theory. I'm just I'm naturally like someone who worries, so I worry that maybe I won't be able to impregnate my wife, you know, because I've never had the situation. I mean, again, I haven't like ever checked or anything like that, and I haven't like, you know. But my point is, like, if it does happen for me when I actually attempt to, I'm not attempting to right now either. I'm just all this caveats, but the point is, if my wife were to get pregnant, I think that would be like, holy shit, wow, right? That would be like a big wow moment for me in like a positive way. So in that sense, like, I can see why like the act of conception and like getting pregnant is like is an incredible thing. So that's why I'm asking you, like, kind of more directly, like, this thing that's been conceived, like, let's forget the hypocrisy of the pro-life movement for a second and just talk about it, like, strictly. Like, what do you think about it? Like, does it make you uncomfortable or not, like, the act of abortion?
Well, you mean for myself, or? And
again, I'm not trying to ask.
Not that I'm the one that would be. See, look, there's a problem already with two men discussing this issue without the perspective of a person who would actually have to, you know, carry a fetus in her body. That's already a problem.
I agree,
and so
I'm glad I might
still, I might have my feeling about my particular situation, but that does not give me the right to legislate for everyone else and decide for them what they're going to do. People are going to do what they're going to do regardless, you know. And
I know, and I'm just asking you, stripped away from all that, does the idea of abortion make you uncomfortable in any way?
I don't. I'm gonna say no.
Fair enough.
Because I don't. You know, I haven't thought much about it. I just think that it's basically an issue for people to discuss with their doctors. Now, I do think that, I mean, I would hope that a partner would have some kind of say in it. You know, like, is it true that it shouldn't even be discussed, like, by, let's say, a male partner and the female that's carrying the fetus? Like, there shouldn't even be a discussion?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, maybe either. I think the man does have a right to an opinion on this, but for sure.
Have an opinion, but what about legally?
A contribution.
A contribution, yeah, but again, there's a legal. I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about legal issues. I mean, here's another key phrase. It is related. A parasite on the walls of the uterus. What if that's all a fetus is? A parasite on the walls of the uterus, which I think you could argue is the case. I mean, if we take that point of view, then how is it anything other than the woman's decision? Mm-hmm. You know, like, you're the partner, or I don't know. Let's say you have cancer in your body, and your partner says, "Well, I think you should get chemotherapy," or "I don't think you should get chemotherapy, and I'm your partner, so I should have a say in it too." Is that right?
Yeah, but that is different.
She can.
You've
she could have her.
contributed. You are part of that child.
Okay, well, maybe she smoked around you and gave you cancer.
No, I mean your point is taken. I'm just saying, like
I'm being silly now, but maybe I don't know. Like that's a very. How do you argue with that? What if the fetus is a parasite on the walls of the uterus? Like, what if you define it that way? Then that's just like a potentially lethal.
I think it's pretty cynical, though. I don't think. I mean, I saw that wording, but I mean, the mother, she's built to carry a baby successfully.
But there's always some risk. See, that's one of the arguments. Like, abortion is only permitted when the mother's life is at risk. These people that take this point of view say that her life is always at risk. If she's carrying a fetus, if she's carrying this parasite, she's always at risk. So if she chooses to abort it at any time, that's her choice, and no one else's. No one else can interfere. They can maybe express an opinion, but they can't, stop her, or conversely, they can't force her to get an abortion. I mean,
I just think that we should still deal with this most challenging question, which I think is the one that like I'm posing, which is like not about legal, but just the pure morality of it, which again I want to separate from the legal discussion.
Okay. Well, I have a thought about this because they raised this question, which is a difficult one, I admit, to answer. They say, what's the difference between aborting a baby the day before it's delivered and infanticide, basically, like waiting till it pops out and then killing it?
Right, exactly.
Like, would anyone argue that there's a major difference? Like, ninth month,
right,
late term, what do they call it? Late term, third trimester abortion, like the day before delivery to abort. That's cleaner, more moral than, actually delivering the child and then, like, I don't know, strangling it or suffocating it or something. I mean, that's pretty gruesome to consider.
But I mean,
and it reminds me, there's a really unsettling Tolstoy play called The Power of Darkness, and there's a scene in which this unwanted baby is born and then it's, murdered. There's a scene of infanticide. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how they get rid of it. Maybe they just smother it. But it's brutal, And so what is that horrific action? How is that different from, or how is an abortion the day before delivery significantly different from, infanticide?
I just wanted to add that the more I reflect on this, like, it does seem silly to isolate abortion as like the ultimate kind of moral test, because we do live in this world which, as you pointed out early on, like, we don't have this same level of regard for animals, and I just think we can't pretend to live in a pure world knowing the world that we live in. So I don't know why we should treat abortion like it requires this like extreme kind of, do you know what I'm saying?
Well, not only that, I mean,
I'm not trying to sound cynical either, but
do these self-styled pro-lifers care about living, breathing humans existing in the world as much as they do about fetuses. I don't see that.
Right. I think that's important.
And it's just such an outrageous hypocrisy. You're pro-life, really? Okay, so you're opposed to bombing all those people in enemy nations, right? You're opposed to the death penalty, right? You're in favor of universal health care, right? Since you're so pro-life.
I think I want to point out another note in the essay, which says two of the most energetic pro-lifers of all time were Hitler and Stalin, who immediately upon taking power criminalized previously legal abortions. And like in my prep for this show, I just was trying to think about what is the value of human life. And I got pretty down about Russia because I watched this video by a present Russian YouTuber who's pretty courageous for making the kind of videos he makes. And the title of the video was something like, "How valuable is life in Russia?" And the answer was, not very. And beginning specifically with the extreme amount of exterminations committed by Stalin, but even to the point where in the 90s, assassination was very routine, and he even quoted prices. He said, like, yeah, the price for an assassination was usually between $1,000 to $5,000. And every day you would watch the TV and they would announce the latest series of businessmen who were killed, during that, like, crazy 90s period post-Soviet. So
$1,000, I could afford that. I could take out a few people.
But then I mentioned that to like Vaco today, and he went on to say something like, yeah, and the Russian government's like compensation for dead soldiers was even more laughable. It was like $100. So
you mean to the families?
Yeah, to the families.
Wow.
So I don't know, and so life is valuable. I think that's like we need to. I think what you're getting at as well is just like we need to value the living more before we get too high and mighty about this aspect of life.
About fetuses.
Right.
Which may well be parasites on the walls of the uterus.
Again, I'm not sure if I agree with that interpretation. But.
All right. Well, how about this topic this concept of recapitulation? I find this fascinating. The idea that, there's that phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, meaning that the individual being in its growth and development is recapitulating the growth and development of the race, basically, the human race. Like the individual fetus is undergoing all the evolutionary changes which took place from the original cell up to the human. Now, as they point out in the endnotes, evolutionary biologists are skeptical of that viewpoint, but I find it hard to give that up. I like this idea of, he talks about how the fertilized egg, the zygote, begins as a little dot,
Right.
And then there are stages resembling. He says resembling. It's not like it actually is this, but, it resembles a worm, then an amphibian, then a reptile, then a lower mammal.
I think he mentions pig as well.
Yeah, in the 8th week, it becomes a recognizable primate, monkey, ape, human, but with a pig face,
I loved that. I think he couldn't resist himself. Fucking pig face.
I like it. I like that. I like that idea, like...
It definitely is interesting. I think I got kind of bogged down in the technical language there, and I just kind of skimmed over that section. But now that you're you highlight it, it is interesting.
Well, it's in the end notes.
Right. I'm looking at it.
But also in the end notes, look at number 2. This quote from Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism. He says of pregnant women, if they become tired or even die through bearing children, that does not matter. Let them die through fruitfulness. That is why they are there. I don't think Martin Luther got a lot of pussy if he was, advocating such views.
And
did I say that out loud?
Mark has just vilified our Protestant audience. Our subscriber numbers are now going to cut in half. All the Calvinists out there, we still love you.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm not going to advocate for the church that raped me. The church that molested me. Psychologically, so far as I know. Yeah. But the I don't know. I guess he's saying like that concept of recapitulation is not biologically sound.
Right.
But I like to think of it that way,
It has like a spiritual or mythological vibe, in a way.
But the fact that we all evolved from this dot, like the fertilized egg is the size of a period at the end of a sentence.
Right, I like that.
Incredible.
It's very easy to imagine.
A dot. I mean, he actually says that we all came from a dot. We all began as a dot. And also in the end notes, this reminded me of our time in Korea. Shouldn't pro-lifers count birthdays from the moment of conception and not from the moment of birth?
Mm-hmm.
Remember how in Korea age was, determined not by the moment of birth, and not necessarily the moment of conception, but that like a year,
right? The year you were
a
born.
year is added to your life, to your age,
Right.
The year that you spend in the womb is counted as part of your age. So why don't the pro-lifers do that? I mean, that's a trivial matter, but it shows a different conception of things, right? Sure. Oh, you really think that life begins at conception, or the fetus is actually alive? Then okay, then that means I can start driving at 15 because I'm actually 16, and so on. I can start drinking when I'm 20 because I'm actually 21. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And I think another topic we didn't get into, I know we're pretty deep in right now, but even though, well, I'll just speak for myself, I'm secular, but my wife is not, and she believes in reincarnation, and I don't want to completely dismiss that as a belief system. So I think it's worth honoring to some extent. One of the ways that they used to think about appropriacy of abortion, I guess, was whether it happened before, after the what was the term? It was something with the word soul in it. It was a
ensoulment.
Cool, ensoulment. That was a cool word too. So
wait a minute, you're saying the Hare Krishnas, that what is their viewpoint on abortion?
Well, her personally, she's in our compromised category,
Mm-hmm.
But and I don't even know the doctrinal position. My question was more from the Hindu or the Krishna perspective, both of these faith systems which value reincarnation, which are centered around reincarnation, how do they view this? How do they view the baby that's been aborted or the fetus that's been aborted? Is that something that will then just immediately go into another carnation?
Oh,
right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that was my.
Well, then
question.
what do they
When does the
say
soul-
about the what do they say about the ejaculated sperms, or what do they say about a miscarried baby, or
Well, I assume a miscarriage. Yeah, that probably is a soul that, and now it's time to start again.
So that do they have?
I'm just
a cutoff
guessing though. I don't
point?
know.
Like, do
It's
they?
a question I have. I have no idea.
I see.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm just
that-
wondering.
you know,
it's an
the
interesting
concept
question.
the concept of ensoulment is interesting, right? Like, okay, they're arguing that at some point there there is a soul, but it seems like there's been some flexibility with the timeline there. I mean, we already talked about that, right? Like Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas had a
right.
different point of view
Right.
before the discovery of microscopes. But how do we know, like, the sperms and ejaculation are not ensouled also?
Yeah, well, as Sagan points out, learned theologians have interpreted this differently. Some have asserted it to occur in the sperm before conception, at the time of quickening, and at birth. So they've provided us with all the different options. So they're as confused as the public discourse is.
Yeah. Well, which is all the more reason why a compromise position is the most reasonable.
Right.
You know, like it's such a, there's so much uncertainty there that you've got to err on the side of freedom and choice.
Agreed.
All right, so I think we solved the problem of abortion for
Yeah,
everyone.
there you go, guys. You're welcome.
The two white cisgender males resolved it all. So I hope that was enlightening.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I've just about Carl Sagan.
Sure.
I never really watched Cosmos when it was on, but I really enjoyed this essay, which was recommended to me by someone on Facebook. I can't remember who it was, so I'm glad I saw that. I'm quite impressed with the presentation
Agreed.
of this essay, but anyway.
And I want to share my
also-
cringy Carl Sagan story, which I told you I was going to save. And this is like one of the most bizarre.
But hold
moments.
on, hold on.
Go on. Sorry.
I just want to, before you get into that, I want to say that I recently learned that Carl Sagan was a big time pothead, so
Oh, nice.
I commend him for that. You know,
Respect.
so I wonder if he has an essay on the legalization of weed.
We'll have to inquire.
Maybe we can look into that. Because I know he was an advocate, so he must have written something about it. Maybe we can find a text out there. Anyway, tell your story.
My little cringy story. There was we had a field trip in elementary school to see Carl Sagan speak at like the big basketball arena. I think it was the America West Arena where the Phoenix Suns play. And
Nice.
yeah, but at that time I was like firmly Christian, and
You were? Good little Catholic boy?
yeah, for sure. I mean, and I wasn't like even like
Were you an altar boy?
I wasn't, but I was in the choir. Anyway, I was a youth group leader.
Okay.
You know, I got all my credentials. But again, I was always way more liberal than two of my best friends who were like in the Christian conservative camp. Like Catholics, we weren't as extreme on a lot of stuff. Like it was still a considerably more liberal world, in my opinion. But anyway,
Wait, they were Protestant?
yeah, so like in my three best friends, two of them were Baptists and one was Jewish, and all pretty like
Okay.
devout. But the Protestants, I mean, they were like slinging some really heavy doctrinal stuff. Like they were definitely believing that without Christ you'll go to hell, and that we always had arguments about that. Like, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. And like, I would be like, well, what about what about these people? What about these? Do you really think they're all going to go to hell? And like, well, that's what the Bible says, And they were more extreme about alcohol, about masturbation, about sex, about cussing. Like, I was always pretty like liberal and all that stuff. But anyway, that's a side note as well. So my only point was that I was like I was a kid. Okay, I was way before I started questioning the existence of God. So I'm like 10 years old probably, or 11 years old when this field trip happened. And all I remember is like at the end of this like very scientific presentation, which was probably all way over my head, there was like a queue for kids to ask questions. And I got into this queue and I asked, everybody else had been like pretty deferential in their questions. And I asked, so you really want us to believe that we all came from monkeys? And like, and a lot of the kids like started cheering. And so like after this great man had given this wonderful speech, I had brought on this mob mentality. A lot of people like supported me because we're all just dumb fucks. Like, and I just feel so embarrassed about it now. And like at the time, I just didn't understand what the hell I was doing, But like later on,
what did he do? What was his?
I don't know. I don't even remember. I think he just kind of like, I think he was polite about it. I mean, I don't think he dunked on me or something. I just think he realized that he was just dealing with like a naive kid. But it's pretty silly.
A brainwashed idiot.
I mean, but it's a pretty embarrassing moment. But anyway,
I say that affectionately because
yeah.
I've got many such cringeworthy moments in my own history, which I'm not going to share
Leave that to me.
At this time. Yeah. Oh, I wish I could have seen his reaction.
Yeah. It's weird that I remember, too. It's just such a vague memory. It's like hard to even extrapolate. But I know that something like that would have just... And I'm guessing my teachers are pretty ashamed of me, too, I don't think... They never told me, but I'm sure they were like, Jesus Christ.
Shut the fuck up, kid.
You fucking...
Well, I mean, he didn't care. He probably went outside and smoked a fatty.
Exactly.
So. Okay, well, maybe we should do that. Let's go smoke a fatty.
Yeah, I've been wondering if I could like get away with some recreational weed smoke in the next couple weeks while I'm away from Russia. And I'm wondering, like, will they drug test me at any point? And then, of course, we got the issue with the WNBA player. Have you followed that story at all? This Brittany something?
I remember hearing about that a few months ago. Yeah, she's still locked up, or
she's locked up. She pleaded guilty. I think that they've sentenced her to 10 years, and now there's talk about a possible prisoner swap for some like high-level corrupt Russian businessman.
Okay.
Oh Jesus! But anyway, let's hope that the KGB doesn't listen to this podcast. I think that's my primary concern at this point. So let's keep our numbers down for the next few weeks until I'm back in Russia.
Okay, I'll do my best. I'll try to say some more offensive shit.
Okay. And
get us canceled.
Cancel us, Calvinists. You already got the Calvinists.
Oh, well. What a pity.
Yeah.
All right, so what's next?
Next is the great Ginsbergian poem Howl. The poem he's most known for, 1956, Beatniks. We're going to get into all that stuff. So if you're a fan of
in
the
its
Beatniks,
entirety.
Well, I don't think we're going to like read the whole poem, but yeah, it'd be cool if the reader can familiarize themselves with a little bit of the poem, and I'm sure we'll at least read the introduction because it's like really amazing first section. And no, but I think that we'll use it as a way just to discuss the legacy of the Beats, and so maybe we can also talk a little bit about Kerouac and anyone else we want to bring in.
Burroughs.
Yeah, we can go a lot of places. Gary Snyder, right?
Yeah.
So, but we'll focus it on Howl for sure.
Okay.
So.
All right, we'll look forward to that.
Yep.
Thanks everybody.
Yep. Cheers.
Check us out on Substack.
You know you want to. Peace.
Bye.
Texting.